Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1341. Easier for both. Standing at the massive door, he presumed to be the entrance to the boss room, Seth halted for a while. The blacksmith had to process what had just happened. Although he was in his 120s, more than 20 levels higher than the Dragon Newt guards, the ease with which he was able to take their lives was a shock. He had just killed 6 level 90+ monsters and harvested 6 pristine big, rare souls, retaining almost 90% of their skills, with 3 even retaining an ego. In addition, he got 6 level 90+ Dragon Newt bodies, in peak condition without a single injury. Seth had gotten used to being somewhat strong thanks to his items, but this was technically a death touch ability, even though it didn't necessarily work for anything stronger or equal to his strength. He was technically a tyrant. The bane of the weak. That's why he took a moment to fight down the excitement he was feeling. With this kind of power, he needed to be very careful not to become overconfident. Checking for life sign on the other side of the door using life detection of his Terra Topaz earrings, he slowly opened the door giant down, finding a big hall beyond it, but this was not the boss room. The map called this section of the dungeon the palace. It was not the boss room, but Seth was sure he was on the right track. The chief had to be in the palace, right? Seeing the guards and champions walking the halls of the palace, the sick guys at the entrance suddenly didn't seem that big anymore. Ah, fuck it, the moment he caught one of these big guys walk down a hallway alone, Seth grabbed the massive humanoid's neck. In an instant, his soul left his body, and his body joined the other 6 in the blacksmith's inventory. He did tell Bryce that he would take a few more souls in exchange for sparing the orc, didn't he? Although he had just tried to calm down and control himself, he couldn't help but smile. This wasn't going overboard, he did worse, on a bigger scale. Yeah, this was fine. The goal to find the throne room as soon as possible fluttered away like a butterfly on a summer breeze. Instead, the blacksmith played Pac-Man, just that he was an invisible ghost and the dragon newts patrolling the palace halls were his little yellow beads he swallowed on his way. When so many guards were missing that someone should have noticed, there was no longer anyone left to notice. Seth had packed away almost 3 stacks of dragon newt bodies, of the palace guard in his inventory, and he also knew where the boss room was, as he had avoided that big door until now. Looks like I was right, he muttered, finding a big cavern with a crude throne at the other end. The map labeled it the throne room, the boss room of the dungeon. You were right this time, Tatzel commented from the pet space. It's not like I could have expected the first door just leading into an inner section of the dungeon. Okay, the blacksmith justified himself, having thought the gate with the 6 guards was the boss room. This place, on the other hand, was not especially guarded at all. Probably something like our boss is so strong, he doesn't need guards, the blacksmith mused, trying to come up with an explanation. That makes 1 out of 3, Tatzel joked when Seth found the throne room filled with high-level 90+ throne guardians. They had already noticed the door being opened by nobody. They were already vigilant, so Seth saw no reason not to use observe at this point. Not like it matters, Seth said with a shrug before he started harvesting another set of souls. Using his speed and the Scorpio escape, Seth weaved between the vigilant guardians, capturing the souls of each with a simple touch. As they sank to the ground, Seth's head felt a little heavy. The soul robbing took a toll on his mental power, much more than his pyrokinesis. It was closer to using conjuring and summoning a demon. Still, it paid off. The blacksmith easily got his hands on another 13 guardian souls. All that was left now was the boss. As if a gust of death had swept through the boss room, the elite guard simply fell, and then their bodies vanished into thin air. Pithra jumped up from their crude throne at the back of the chamber, eyes wide open in shock. She couldn't believe what was happening. Despite being vigilant against an invisible enemy, her elite guard was simply wiped from existence. Her eyes shifting from left to right, as she tried to concentrate on her senses and took a battle-ready stance. Her claws were covered in orange aura, ready to tear apart anything and the slightest sign of a presence. Pithra had fought hard for the position of the local chief. She had even killed various male leaders several levels above her to get where she was. She trusted her power, and she wouldn't be caught off guard by such petty parlor tricks. She suddenly felt a cold touch on her nape. A freezing aura invaded her body. It happened within the blink of an eye, but it felt like a lifetime to her, as the glacial hand enveloped her very soul and tried to yank it out of her body. Pithra knew what pain was. She had been cut, burned, poisoned, dissolved, even partially skinned alive, but never, in her whole life, had she felt such an excruciating full-body shock. Her face, her arms, her innards, it felt as if someone was ripping the skin off her flesh, from the inside, across her whole being. The scream that left her throat could hardly fathom the torture she was enduring, fighting for her very being to stay within her mortal shell. Pithra had no idea how long this agony continued, but it ended at some point. Hardly able to grasp a coherent thought, she fell forward on her knees, crawling over the ground. Away, just away. Had she been human, she would be drenched in sweat. The cold energy had not managed to kidnap her into the shadows, but the pain and fatigue of the battle had taken root in her mind. Tisk, looks like our levels are not far enough apart. You should have just let go. A man suddenly appeared before her, a helmet in one hand and a blackened sword in the other. She might have found his stature and armor imposing if she were not half out of her mind at this point. It would have been easier for both of us, he simply continued, uncaring of her response. Then he swung the sword, its blackened blade covered in mana and deep red flames. Her mind had signed off, but her body's reflexes reacted. She couldn't dodge the blade completely, suffering a deep cut across her chest, but she was not dead, yet. She looked back, her body stiffened. The man had vanished from where he had stood before. A soft, melancholic whistle sounded from behind her, accompanied by a quick, merciless slash. The pain of being severed in two was nothing compared to what she experienced beforehand. If anything, she welcomed the cold embrace of death. In this state, she didn't even mind if this was her true end, and she didn't respawn, was what she thought. When the cold power touched her again, she lacked the energy to resist, and despair filled her mind when she realized that she would truly not be able to return. The spirit blacksmith had come to harvest her soul, and so he did. Chapter 1342 Already? Are we already going home? Tatzel asked once Seth snuck back out of the dungeon. The blacksmith was quite happy with today's haul. Not only did he manage to collect a good number of big souls, but he also got 13 massive ones with egos and pithras. In addition to that, the dungeon was quite loaded, so Seth was able to make off with roughly 200 gold in a mix of gold and silver coins, as well as a handful of epic and unique rated dungeon items. Although Seth had no interest in using them himself, they were good to be put in the guild vault, where members could purchase them. Why do you ask? Is there a place you would like to visit while we are here? The blacksmith asked, surprised. He had indeed intended to return now, since he had finally collected all the materials. Looking at Pithra's soul, the blacksmith got all giddy, thinking of the items he would make with it. Soul of Pithra, epic, X, ego, crafting material. The soul of Pithra, a dragon newt chieftain on the path of the legendary monk. Her ego and 98% of her original memories and skills have been preserved in the soul. The soul also holds traits, iron will, draconic heritage. Pithra was Leve 123, when Seth reaped her soul, meaning he had stepped on the path to legend herself. Her soul was not as big as Don Chad's or Alzalsar's, but it shared the same size qualifier, which meant that it had at least a mana pool of 100,000. Together with the prayer bead Hubert brought him and the 3 pearls he chose together with Sivri, he was sure to be able to create something tremendous for the fairy brute. Although he was excited, there was no harm in hearing the giant snake let out. No, but it would be a shame to immediately return. Since we are already out like this, I would like to do something with Mom, but I have no idea what. Tatzel gave an unconfident answer. Seth was touched. The Imuji just wanted to spend some more time with him. Let me think, he said, and started mulling over what other side quests he still had to do, that led him out of his workshop. He thought of it all the way back to the spot where he and Tatzel landed earlier. Oh, I know, he exclaimed shortly after the Imuji took off back to the skies, with him on his back. The view of the mountains reminded him of Mount Agra. The tree station and holy mountain of Nas Korn had considerably calmed down and were recovering well after the attack of the scene. It had been on his mind recently. On one hand, because he wanted to visit Nas Korn and ask it again about the waking of the slumbering realm. Although they had other god of prehistory on their side, like Solfium or Samhatch, they were not really substantial at their time and only remembered a little themselves. Nas Korn, on the other hand, had been persevering since the past and would probably be able to tell him more about the changes Earth was currently experiencing. At least the ones concerning the resurgence of the past. He doubted Nas Korn knew a lot about cybernetic monsters or a zombie virus. The other reason Agra was on his mind was the pet egg Seth and the girls had purchased in Spring City. The Mountain King was a kind of troll that selected a mountain as its home and drew strength from it. There were only two very special mountains in Minas March: Mount Robbery and Mount Agra. However, none of his closer friends were the type who would always stay in Minas March. Even Link, their chef, would occasionally go on adventures to raise his level or forage for ingredients as a gourmet hunter. Since the strength of the mountain kind was severely lowered when away from his mountain, it was a pet that didn't really fit any of them. However, there was someone who had a very similar condition to the mountains. Torio, the saint of Nas corn. Seth didn't know the man too well, but he knew that he had a similar condition, where his power was at its peak, as long as he stayed in the vicinity of the holy mountain where the main shrine of Nas corn was located. This was also why he never joined Minas Mar on any of their missions, despite being comparable in strength to the members of the field teams. The man and the troll were a match made in heaven, so to speak. This was why Seth had the idea to sell the Mountain King egg to Torio as a bribe for Nas corn to tell him about the distant past, so they would be able to better understand what more to expect, especially from Lezekai, the giant, slumbering beast in Y City. How about we pay Mount Agra a visit, he suggested. Tatzel didn't answer. Realizing that his question couldn't be heard because of the loud wind, he repeated it telepathically. Ah! I haven't been there in a long time. Yes, let's visit it. Tatzel cheered excitedly about the little side quest. Obviously, he would fly there on Puffles, the way was just too long. But they also couldn't go back to Woburn, after the scene they made last time. But that was not a problem, they simply flew to Minas Palin, their magic tower in the Holy Land, and the original teleport hub for all adventurers to come here. It had lost some of its significance since the Labyrinth City was finished, but that didn't mean anything to them. Flashing his status as the tower master at the staff stationed at Minas Palin, while Evie was out on a mission, Seth, with Tatzel in his pet space, quickly used the teleport hub to move to the branch of the system church in Agra. Stepping out of the church, Seth saw the familiar scene of a massive tree towering over the place and shielding it with its crown, and a mountain towering at the edge of it. But there was something that differentiated this place from other tree stations. The site of Agra was a little special, as it actually had two massive trees. At the foot of the holy mountain, covering the city with its crown was a comparatively small sapling of the guardian tree, and not far beside it, creating a straight wooden wall across the city and entangling dead branches with living ones, was its fallen predecessor. It was during the attack of the scene, when the Quathita from the fog world summoned the literal avatar of a god to crush Mount Agra and Nas corn. The tree valiantly defended the city, but ultimately died in its duel with the summoned creature of destruction. The massive corpse was left as a memorial and had since become a living space for the people of Agra. Much of the city had been destroyed in the battle. Instead of rebuilding all of it, they had carved a whole housing complex into the trunk of the fallen guardian. As far as Seth knew, they used the wood reclaimed this way in various ways, mostly as building material for even more structures around it. But since it was the wood of the guardian tree, it also found use in bows, weapons, and even armor craft by local craftsmen. Even after its death, it still provided them protection. Should we eat something before looking for Torio and Nas corn? Seth asked Tatzel, who was walking beside him in a minimized form, roughly the size of a pony. Yet. Chapter 1343 Return and Departure. THRES. Geez, took them long enough, Allison commented at the site below. Standing in the governor's estate, the alchemist and the immortal witch were watching a procession of people flow through the gates of THRES. They had been pillaging some of Adam's good booze while he was away. Governor Adam, Mike's party, what remained of Adam's men, and the refugees they saved had finally reached THRES after a 4-day journey. It was much quicker because they had taken the direct route, straight through the ruins of Beta. Originally, his route would have been too dangerous to walk with refugees, even if Adam had not lost many of his comrades. However, thanks to Allison's complaints, Mike's party took the lead on the way back, securing everybody's safety on the express route, which may or may not have involved a huge murder of slimes charging through the ruins and landscape. The crowd below looked moody and tired, residues of slime still stuck in their nooks and crannies, but alive. Allison couldn't imagine what they went through, and she didn't really care. She wanted to leave THRES already and finish her own mission. They had stayed here for long enough. She understood the importance of their mission. But to her, it was not just about collecting and exploring ingredients in the ever-growing forests, or acquiring their seeds to spread them across the worlds of Spacia. Unlike Mike, who chose to take this mission, Allison was here for her expertise. She had been forced to separate from the boyfriend she had finally found. She wanted to return to Myanmar as quickly as possible, so she could be with Nico again. This whole THRES business had only cost them time, and now her original mission was only about to start. How much longer would they have to be apart? We should sober up before meeting Mike and Adam, Evie suggested, casting a detox charm on herself. Allison stared out the window, thinking of Nico, so it took a moment for the witch's words to sink in. Oh, yeah, sure, she said, chucking a small phial of potion that wiped the alcohol from her insides. Her wistful thoughts left with the booze, and she focused back on the situation at hand. Let's go and greet them, she said, straightening her clothes and taking the lead to leave the office they had wrecked during their stay. Adam was glad to finally see the tree in the distance again. He had needed some time to get used to the giant plant tower above the cityscape of Beta, but he had really gotten used to it in the time since Karina visited to bless them with this protector. Watching the last expedition from Emerald City enter THRES made him think of everything that happened to bring him here. How far he went to allow people like them to return to a safe home, and what it cost him. He tried to hold it together on the way here, but now that he was home, the cork started to loosen, and cracks appeared on the shell he created to keep everything in. The faces of his comrades who left their lives on that mountain flew by before his eyes, and he started to choke a little. He swallowed hard and took deep breaths, fighting back his tears. This was not the time or the place. He had to keep it together for a while longer and focus on the present. Adam couldn't allow that their sacrifice was not for nothing. The whole reason they all decided to work with the Muir Empire, despite what they did, was to keep Beta alive. They didn't want their home to be forgotten by the world, only remembered as a nameless field of ruins in one corner of the world. They wanted to take back their home from the beasts and rebuild Beta, one satellite city at a time. He could not bring back the men he lost, all he could do was make sure that their dream didn't die and create a home for the people of Beta who were still out there. In the future, he hoped that the remaining people of Beta who were spread across Myanmar and Y City would be able to return to their old home. The relocation efforts had been the first step. Although this last expedition brought many losses, overall THRES had experienced a huge influx of new people, with the people from Emerald City joining them. He couldn't break down now. As the governor, he had to make sure he provided them a safe home, to allow them to recover and settle in. Now that there was a proper population, it was time to properly organize and manage the operation of the city. The first step would be securing the safety. Having lost many of his friends and elites, he would have to rely on the Guardian Tree for the foreseeable future to guarantee the protection of THRES. He needed to get reinforcements from Muir and train more guards, so they could keep the surroundings safe and cull the dungeons. With this many people, he was sure there would be guilds popping up left and right, which also needed to be managed and organized. Thinking of what Mike told him, there were also things to correct concerning the mermen in general. Adam, I will be leaving THRES after this, Tanamol, who had stepped up to him at some point, informed the governor. Adam was standing at the back of the group, watching the refugees enter their new home. Woken from his distracted thoughts, Adam looked at the demon in surprise. Tanamol had been a great help in Emerald City, and Adam had gotten used to his presence. In his mind, the goat was already part of his people. The sudden message of his departure shook him. Why would he suddenly? But Adam quickly remembered why. The demon had only been with them out of curiosity and for his business. He had been clear about that from the start. Tano had his own things to tend to, he was the one who forgot. Of course, you have a business to look after, Adam said with a sad smile. Another loss, but only a farewell. It wasn't like the demon was gone for good. It took him a moment, but he came to terms with Tanamol's farewells. That's correct. Things were fun while they lasted, and I got to collect a lot of merchandise. Sue, thanks buddy, the demon gave him an unexpected but heartfelt thanks, then he hurriedly huddled away, not giving the druid a chance to give an answer. Seeing the demon act so out of character calmed Adam's heart a little. It seemed like he was not the only one saddened by this goodbye. Noticing that he had been left behind, he quickly caught up with the people entering THRES. As he got closer, he found the chosen of Mahis standing at the side of the gate. The beastman was observing the people as they entered, making sure everything went smoothly and nobody was shoving or harassing others. With how tired they all were from the unusual ride, his task was easy. Looks like you already had your farewells with Tanamol, Mike greeted him with a comment on the weird goodbye he had just witnessed. You could say that. He's probably already on his way to the system church to return to Myanmar right away, Adam said jokingly, but then he became a little more serious. Standing beside Mike and watching the last people from Emerald City enter THRES, he couldn't keep it in anymore. I don't know whether I had the chance to properly thank you for what you did. Thank you for looking for me, Mike. You had no obligation to help us, but you came to our rescue anyway. I'm really grateful that you came for us, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. He had bottled them up earlier, but this was a whole other beverage. Earlier, he had been hit by those who were unable to make it home, but now it was the gratitude for those who made it. He was overwhelmingly grateful to Mike and his party that they not only helped him, but also all of them to make it back. A big hand patted Adam's broad back. No problem. Everything's all right now, Mike said. And Adam believed him until he found his devastated office. Chapter 1344 Magnificent Offer? Mount Agra. Strolling around Agra after their meal, Seth found that Cormac Pale's presence in Agra had become unmistakable. The man was living out his dream of making automatons, and the city was full of them, acting as servants, security, or servers in shops and restaurants. While the spirit blacksmith had only focused on golems as high-performance soldiers to protect the tree stations in times of a crisis, the chosen of Hephaestus had expanded on what his automatons were used for, not unlike the god he was blessed by. The presence of all these de facto robots made Agra look almost futuristic, although the blacksmith didn't quite know whether this was utopian or dystopian. He found that the range of activity and intelligence of the golems was quite broad, making him a little envious, as he was only able to learn the ordinary ego circuit of Hephaestus, while his chosen got the advanced stuff. On the other hand, Seth's golems were able to develop an ego on their own, thanks to the souls he used, or start off with the ego of the soul. Which came with its own problems, but it was still advantageous. After strolling around the city and sightseeing a little, Seth and Tatzel turned toward the sacred mountain, where Nascorn's shrine was located. Things had changed a little with Agra's growth, and not everyone could simply walk up to the mountain to enter the main shrine anymore. Seth was sure nobody would stop him when he identified himself as the Tower Master of Myanmar, but he was actually asked to wait. At least they brought him and the little one to a cozy room with cookies and beverages. Tower Master. It's really you. I'm really sorry to make you wait, Torio, the chosen of Nascorn, greeted him. The man he had met as a tired mess all the way back when Agra needed their help had become quite the picture. The buff young man wore a well-fitted suit that barely contained his muscles. He wore it with an open collar. Tanned by the mountain sun, he also had a healthy complexion that made him look moderately handsome. However, the combination of both made him look like a low-ranking gangster from a third-grade TV show. It didn't fit him at all. Torio, just the man I wanted to meet. No need to apologize, he said after some hesitation, as he was not sure how to react to the man's new style. Ultimately he decided to try and ignore it. What could the Tower Master want with me? I thought you wanted to meet Nascorn. Torio exclaimed, surprised that the Master of Myanmar came to meet him. Technically, you are right, I am here to talk with Nascorn, but you are also involved. So, you should come along, the bard said mysteriously. He didn't want to reveal his business just yet. Last time he tried to ask the ancient god about the changes on Earth it was of no great help. It had something to do with system restrictions not allowing spoilers, but since the expansion was out for a while now, Seth was sure he could get some proper walkthroughs from Nascorn, especially since he came with such a great offering. Then I will bring you up the mountain, Torio said eagerly. The chosen took the lead as they climbed the ancient mountain path up to the main shrine. In the distant past, before the districts, this place had been a tourist attraction, but now it was glowing with a sacred light. Before, there was a vast, semicircular plaza cut into the mountain. Towering opposite of them was the massive statue of Nascorn, the god that looked like a huli rhino. The giant monument was sitting in the niche it was carved out from, with the mountain protecting it since ancient times. Seth, we meet again. It has been a while, the god greeted him with their calm, ethereal voice. Judging by the sound, it had gained back quite a bit of its divine dignity, compared to the past, when it was barely more than a spirit attached to the monument of its former glory. A fate all the prehistoric gods shared. Yet, well, you aren't one to visit often. I'm not the one to visit often, the blacksmith said with a shrug. So, what is your purpose for the visit? The god asked with an audible chuckle. Why do you think I want something? I just went on a little trip with Tatzel and thought to come by. The blacksmith played innocent and pointed at the black snake dragon beside him. Hi, Tatzel greeted, unimpressed by Nascorn's aura. Hi, little one. Seth, you aren't one to visit often. I'm not the one to visit often. I doubt you would come this far on a trip without any purpose at all. Nascorn greeted Tatzel, but reflected Seth's words right back at him. Yeah, fine, you got me. I wanted to ask about the slumbering realm, and I brought a bribe to make you talk. The demonic bard came clean in the face of God. You want to bribe me? Nascorn hollered, imposing. The mountain shook slightly. Yab. Seth was unimpressed by the show. He knew too much about gods at this point to face them with reverence. Not that he did so in the beginning. Fine. What is it? The supposed anger of earlier was blown away, as if it were just a joke. Now, Nascorn spoke in a businesslike manner. Having expected that, Seth pulled the pet egg from his inventory. This is the egg of a mountain king, a highest grade pet with the multipliers of an epic tank and a good chance to become a legend when it reaches adulthood and is properly trained. Seth introduced the purchase he made in Spring City. Its traits are quite similar to those of your champion, and if you bless it, I'm sure it will be a great asset in protecting Agra in the future, the bard continued, hyping it up, revealing his intention to offer it to Nascorn. What a magnificent offer! 250 gold, the blacksmith mercilessly cut off the god's emotional thanks. Mr. Moneybags was always ready to squander money for himself and his girls, but even if Nascorn turned out to be a hot babe and a bomb in bed, the application period was over, and he wasn't going to throw 500 gold out the window, just for information. I bought it for 500 gold, and I'm reselling it to you at a 50% discount, if you answer my questions, the Tower Master explained his offer. The god was silent for a long while, as Seth fought back a mischievous grin. That wasn't very nice. The rhino finally said, defeated. If it wasn't interested in the egg, they would have probably argued back, but Nascorn simply accepted that he was pranked. Go ahead, ask your questions, I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. Nascorn acquiesced, and Seth finally got his chance to ask all the questions he was able to come up with, based on the knowledge he had collected so far. But the first of them was, what or who is Lezekai? Chapter 1345 Beast of the Land. Oh, that one is easy. Lezekai is the primordial beast of the land. He draws power from Earth herself, and his waking is a sign of great changes on Earth. Are you asking because he surfaced in Y City? The god readily revealed the field boss's identity. Right, I was interested in whether he was the cause of Y City's technology stopping to work. But when he is a sign of great change, is Lezekai not the cause of the awakening for the slumbering realm, right? The blacksmith asked, a little confused. He had heard about primordial beasts in various mythologies he came across when studying up on Olympians, but it was the first time it was connected to great change. The question of what caused only Y City to be forced to develop their own magi tech had always bugged him a little. Right, Lezekai's slow awakening is only one of the indicators, not the cause. But it was his presence that crippled the district of Ypsilon. As you can see, the leakage of his power increases the speed of the resurfacing, changing many laws of nature that human technology relies on. Nascorn explained. One of the indicators? There wouldn't be any other indicators we should know about, right? The blacksmith asked suspiciously. The way the god just said that somehow indicated there was more than one phenomenon appearing with the return of Earth as past. I mean, Lezekai is only the beast of the land. Obviously, there are more primordial beasts, like Kobruna, the Cloud Huntress, and Tarbinus of the Depth. But even if they awake, you won't see those guys. The ancient god named another two beasts on the level of Lezekai without a care in the world. That sounded like a flag, Seth mumbled, assured that he would see them at some point in the future. At least one of the things he was curious about was finally solved. The catastrophe of Ypsilon, the loss of their technology, was caused by Lezekai's presence. Okay, enough about the horned bear. I've been to Y City not too long ago and came across a few peculiar creatures with intellect. The blacksmith changed the topic and started talking about his experiences in Y City. He talked about his fight with Don Chad, Strike Forbone, the fairy cobbler he met, as well as the other creatures in their weird court. Apart from the weird undead, he wanted to know more about these fairy courts Strike Forbone spoke of, and the geese some of the souls he harvested held. Ho, so the power of oaths and taboos has also revived with the realm. Nascorn said, surprised. The power of oaths and taboos, the the bard asked, curious. The name itself didn't sound like anything good, but having seen a few, it was a very powerful way to circumvent the usual rules of the world by paying a price. That is essentially what a geese is, an oath or a taboo. Sometimes they can turn into a curse, too. There are various kinds of them, but in general, it is the obligation to do or not do something in exchange for great power. However, if you break the geese, the smallest price will be losing the power you gain. The Holy Rhino gave a rough explanation. Seth nodded along with what the god said. What Nas Korn told him fit with his own observation. It worked similarly to a deal with a demon, except that the possible gains were on the level with someone who became a legend. A geese allowed a mortal to break the natural order. They paid a high price, but it was a lot easier than becoming a legend or a god. In the future, when the realm properly wakes up, even humans will be able to gain their own geese. Nas Korn added, reminding Seth of the special power some world of the system kept from the time before the system god. A geese had to be Earth's original power, existing apart from magic and science. I understand. Can you tell me more about the creatures that are appearing with the slumbering realm and their organization? After Seth understood what geese were, he tried to steer the conversation toward the other point he was talking about. He wanted to know more about the creatures that were appearing, their natural geese and the way their society worked. Judging from Strike's words, they were not united as one people, but beings of various backgrounds came together in something they called courts. Only the beings that count themselves as the fair folk will sometimes convene in courts, if there is a sufficiently strong king or queen to unite and lead them. A court can be as few as a handful of members, or include a country's worth of entourage. Depending on their inclinations, they are either light or dark courts. Light and dark courts? Seth asked. He couldn't quite remember whether the cobbler mentioned something like that or not. Obviously, this classification is from an outsider's perspective, but courts are rarely a heterogeneous mix. Folks with a warm and friendly temper don't mix with the selfish and cruel. As the latter were prone to cause trouble and even commit atrocities, they were called dark courts. That means those categorizations would be the same for us, right? The blacksmith asked with a raised eyebrow. If the people of the past called them dark courts because they made trouble at best and caused serious problems at worst, then that made sense for the people of the present, too. I guess so. I just wanted to mention that it purely describes their alignment. Sometimes the members of the dark court will seem very bright and colorful until you recognize their dark intentions, and those with good intentions won't always look very friendly. The god cautioned him not to be deceived by their looks. Thanks for the reminder, Seth said honestly. At first, he obviously thought that he was not one of those people who judged others by their looks. However, he had to admit that his reactions had changed since the introduction of magic to his world. Quite often, evil practices and dark magic tended to have an impact on the creatures and people using them, making judging a book by its cover a valid approach at the first meeting. If Nas Korn had not warned him, he might have treated these fair folk like mobs, instead of people. Because it was clear, often the prettiest people had the darkest intentions. They only used their beautiful facade to lure others in. This reminded him of the glow people from the fog. Were they also a court? He asked the god. No, a court is made up of a diverse cast of different creatures that are born from the land. Although the Tuathata have been here since ancient times, they are not native to Earth. Born from the land? Seth asked. Another thing he learned after the introduction of magic was to pay close attention to the way people chose their words. Nas Korn had said natives, or those born on Earth, by creatures born from the land. Yes, I guess this would be the biggest difference between the things you knew and the changes about to come, the god mumbled. What do you mean? How to explain it? Right, humans and normal animals propagate by mating, right? Although the creatures born from Earth can do that too, their origin are unique beings that gain a corporeal shape due to various factors. So, they just come into existence. Seth summed up the wordy explanation, but he was still trying to wrap his head around this concept. In the system, even magical beasts followed the natural order. They grew up, mated, had offspring, so on and so forth. The only thing he had heard of that was similar, were undead. Natural undead could form from the vestiges of the living and the dead. Corpses may be reanimated, or the soul splinters left by death would evolve into ghosts. This was a talk he had heard of during his first time working with Tunomol. But the undead were undead. The beings he met were clearly alive with living bodies and unique souls. This god was telling him that these creatures were simply popped into existence by the slumbering realm, because conditions were met? The matter is a little more complex, but yes. They spawn, just like in those video games you people used to play in the past. The concept of respawn is not entirely owned by the dungeon god. Before Earth began to slumber, creatures simply came into being, just like gods. The god emphasized the last word. Right, there was another case. Gods were also often a concept that took physical shape and grew from faith. Not always did they start off as individuals who became deities and attained godhood. Was this maybe the reason a geese was able to bend the rules of the world, similar to the power of a god or a legend? In that case, it would make sense that a geese, something originating or granted by the world, would have the same possibility. It was one thing for mobs to appear with this kind of perk. But if, as Nas Korn said, people would be able to gain a geese in the future, in addition to the already granted skills of the system, just how chaotic would Earth become once the realm completely awakened? Don't worry too much. The god suddenly said. Just because people will be able to gain a geese, doesn't mean everyone will get one, or that they can choose what they get. Unlike skills you can train, traits you can gain, or affinities you are born with, a geese is granted by the realm. Power and price depend on your destiny. It's also why I mentioned that it can be a curse. The god's explanation soothed his worry about the ensuing chaos, but now he was afraid to have a shitty geese forced onto him. Welp, that's a risk I can't help you with. Chapter 1346. No way around it. There is no way around getting a shitty geese. The blacksmith is surprised that not even a god was all-knowing. Most attempts will just make it worse, you might even end up with several bad ones. If you really don't want it, you should hurry and become a legend or a god. Only then will you have the choice whether you accept it or not, the god told him nonchalantly. Well, it made sense, but who knew how quickly the realm was going to awaken? It wasn't easy to become a legend. The cost to level up rose exponentially the higher he climbed, and he already didn't have an easy path. Unlike the others, he could not go around aura farming with adventures and heroic deeds. Since the great tournament, he didn't really do any publicity stunts to get his name out to the system worlds. Of course, they won their battle with Spacia, but he didn't gain that much from this news. It was less about individuals and more about Minas Mar as a whole doing a great deed. Maybe his plan to flood the auction house with high-quality gear had to be implemented sooner rather than later. And that when he just thought he could relax a little and just craft for as long as he felt like. The god and the blacksmith talked for a while longer, but it was mostly inconsequential stuff until they got to the important part, which was 150 gold. Nas Korn tried to haggle. You can't haggle after the deal. We agreed on 250G and the information, nothing less, the blacksmith argued against the voice nobody but him heard. He saw no reason for using telepathy himself. It was the god's dignity that was falling, by trying to haggle with him. Tisk, fine. Torio, go get 250 gold from the treasury and give it to the tower master. Hearing his god's revelation, the chosen hurried away to fulfill God's commandments. They waited for about 15 minutes in silence before the young man returned, his fine suit now all wrinkly and drenched with sweat. I brought the money. What is it for? Torio asked, huffing after sprinting up and down the mountain. Instead of answering, Seth brought out the egg of the Mountain King, holding it right in front of his eyes. I made a deal with Nas Korn to give you your new pet. This is the mountain kind, a kind of troll that can grow terrifyingly strong in the vicinity of the mountain he chose as his home. It's a highest grade pet with the potential to become a legend, and that chance only rises if it gains Nas Korn's blessing, the bard reiterated the speech he held the god. Torio stared at the massive egg, the size and appearance of a watermelon carved from marble, which the blacksmith was holding up. His eyes were already twinkling with desire after he listened to Seth's short introduction. My arm is getting tired. What are you waiting for? Take it, Seth prompted him, when the chosen was simply staring at the egg in his hand. Belatedly, Torio carefully took the egg with both his hands from the tower master. And you will need this. The egg is enchanted with a preservation spell. It will only hatch when you dispel it using this scroll. The blacksmith repeated the words of Edgar, the clerk of Excellent Beasts where Seth had bought the pets. Thank you, Torio mumbled, taking the roll with his free hand, while he cradled the big egg like a child in his other arm. No need to thank me, you paid for it, after all, Seth said jokingly. With the egg having transferred owner, Seth didn't intend to stay and watch it get hatched. He and Nas Korn talked a little longer about the current events in Agra, but the city was calm. Despite its close vicinity to Spring City and Thres, there was little influx of cultivators and no sightings of cybernetic beasts, yet. Leaving some cautionary tales with the god and its chosen, the blacksmith and Tatzel finally left the holy mountain. "Are you ready to return now?" Seth asked Tatzel, walking beside him. They were both munching on candied fruits they saw at a store when walking by. It was already getting late, and the sun was slowly setting at the edge of the sacred mountain. "Yes, today was fun. I'm feeling a lot better," the little dragon said happily. Although Seth felt a little regretful that he didn't get to start on Finn's accessories today, seeing Tatzel in a better mood was worth it. They returned to the system church in Agra and moved straight back home to Minas Mar, appearing in the entrance hall. While Tatzel waddled off to the room where he built his own little hoard of stuff he looted on his adventures with the beasts of calamity, Seth returned to his quarters, where two ladies were already waiting for an explanation for why he came so late. The next day, the blacksmith hurried to the workshop after breakfast. Having managed to defend his secret against Mina and Finn during their questioning, Seth finally got to lock himself in the workshop. With all the materials he needed for his surprise, there was nothing in his way to finish them before anyone had the chance to spoil it. Going over it again, he had the legendary last prayer bead of Saint Beatrice that Hubert had brought in after a long time of searching. The legendary bronze bead would give him the base material for 2 rings and a necklace. Following Sivri's advice, he had also gotten 3 pearls that would create an additional effect. They were the Pearl of Sai, the Pearl of Jinn, and the Pearl of Hatta. He had paid quite a lot for these epic monster cores, but their effects were worth the price. Lastly, he had attained the soul of Pithra, the former chief of dragon newts in the Holy Land of the Adventurer Guild. Not only was the soul rated X in size and had an ego, but Pithra was on the path of becoming a legendary monk. The blacksmith had no way to get his hands on the soul of Beatrice, which would have been the most perfect fit for the item, but he was convinced that the bead would synergize with the soul of Pithra, taking their similarities into account. The blacksmith assembled all of them in front of him on a workbench. These were probably the best assortment of materials he would be able to get. Not just in this moment, but at all. There was only a slight doubt, because the possibility that there existed other unique or legendary materials that could substitute for any of these was not zero. Whatever, these were the best for what he wanted to do now. Seth studied the blueprints one last time to get ready for the process. Then picked up the prayer bead. Weighing it in his hand, he stepped to the furnace burning with its pale blue, almost white spirit flame. It was time to craft and see whether the legendary effect would survive the reforging of its item. Chapter 1347 I will make something out of you. The blacksmith cleared his throat and twirled Karen's obol in his hand. As he placed the golden bronze bead with the worn-off scale pattern in the bright flame, he hummed an uncharacteristic tune. It was no demonic music echoing in the workshop this time. Since Finn's basic characteristics were still those of a cleric, the blacksmith had decided against using any demonic skill on her equipment. He had also decided against using any of the remaining Olympian enchantments in his catalogue, as she was the chosen of Bes, a Heliopolian god. But it wasn't a problem. Before he knew it, Seth's singing had risen to craftsman level 5, and with the addition of Orpheus' voice and voice of Seth, he was able to properly perform most forging ballads Tord could teach him. Based on them, Seth had created a slightly modified version. Let's get down to business to reinforce the bronze clank. The hammer struck the glowing hot bead, and Seth channeled his mana through the hammer and into the material. In addition to the ballad, he was using reinforcement on the metal to raise its durability, just like Tord taught him. You're the softest bronze I've ever met, but you can bet, before we're through I'll make some bling out of you, his jovial voice echoed in the workshop, accompanied by the beat of the hammer massaging the power of the song into the soft bronze. Malleable like a disciple, but a strength within. Once refined and centered, you are sure to shine. The effects were different from demonic ballads, where dark runes would sink into the metal. Instead, it was a gentle stream of power that sprang from his words and was molded into the materials as he forged it over and over. You're a classless, low-qual, pathetic clod and you haven't got a glow, but somehow I'll make something out of you. He didn't give the bronze a chance to catch its breath. He kept lyrically berating it, while his hammer struck with the force of a great typhoon, and mana circulated like a coursing river. Time was racing by quickly until the bronze arrived. After going through the whole order, the preliminary state was much better than Seth expected. Initially, he had doubted its suitability for high-grade accessories, as it would have to withstand raging battles in the future. But things went well. Once the bronze was saturated, the treatment to reinforce and homogenize the metal was done. It had gained a mysterious glow thanks to the power of the ballad and reinforcement, strengthening it and bringing out its legendary properties. Now, he started driving the metal out into a long, narrow ingot, just like he would with any other material for jewelry. Moving on from there, he forged out the base parts for the pendant and the ring bands, as well as the rough parts for the fittings of the pearls, before his ballad finally ended. The strengthening was finished, and the bronze had gained a much cleaner look, close to bright gold. For the rest of the process, the goldsmith sat down at his jewelry table. What was left to do before he could start enchanting the pieces was the assembly and refinement. Seth had started working early in the morning, but it had taken a while to prepare the bronze, so it was almost noon. However, absolute focus had long since taken control of the blacksmith, and he completely forgot about lunchtime. He immediately continued working. Using pyrokinesis to weld and mold the parts at the jewelry table, Seth followed the blueprints he had made together with Sivri and built the base for the 2 rings and the pendant. Then it was finally time for the pearls of Sai, Jin and Hada to join the crafting process. Although they were called pearls, they were actually the cores of a specific family of powerful aquatic monsters, the Shiko. The reason they were called pearls was because they looked like they were made of nacre. Like natural pearls, they had irregular but smooth shapes and varied in color. Seth started with the pearl of Sai. It had a golden champagne hue and was the shape and size of an almond, like a flattened tear. Since it was the pearl that granted a fiery punch, it was meant for one of the rings. Having already roughed out most of the parts he needed, he only did the fitting for the stone. Once done, the goldsmith welded it to one of the ring bands he had prepared, so the pearl was parallel to the wearer's finger. After refining its shape and giving it a little polish, it was ready for enchanting, and Seth turned to the next pearl. The pearl of Jin was silver with a blue hue. Its shape was more like a rice, long with a round intersection. Using Karen's obel, Seth gave it a slight curve and did the exact opposite to before. The goldsmith set the pearl of Jin along the ring band, perpendicular to the wearer's finger, giving it a more modern design. Time flew by, and the second ring soon joined the first on the side of the table, ready for enchantment. Lastly, there was the pearl of Hada. It was very different from the other two, showing a mix of black and iridescent green. Its effects were also very different and had nothing to do with physical attacks. Its shape was an irregular sphere with small bumps and dimples, looking a little like several small squares fused into a big one. The first thing he did to the spheroid was to drill a carefully considered hole through and push in a thin pin, to create an axle, before turning to assemble the suspension he had planned together with Sivri. Since the shape was almost round, they had come up with a more special design than to set it in a pendant or simply fix a loop on it to hang it from a necklace. The pearl of Hada was going to be held by 2 bronze rings, intersecting on the pole he had created this way. This would allow the pearl to turn in its suspension. Continuing to assemble and disassemble the pendant, Seth kept filing away at the rings to make sure the pearl fit properly. When everything fit satisfactorily, he did not completely assemble the pendant, because it would make the next step, enchanting, a lot harder. But with the parts done, he could finally move on to the next step, putting some more magic into the 3 accessories. The blacksmith immediately continued with the pendant. The enchantments Seth was adding were on the tamer side, as he avoided demonic and Olympian ones. The blacksmith also consciously decided against leaving the enchantment to run. The golem enchanter was currently with Nadal to enchant Mina's new armor, but that was not the reason. These were the engagement presents for his girlfriend, so he wanted to make them on his own. A smaller reason was his worry that the arcane enchantments could get in the way of everything else that was already going on with the set. Better safe than sorry. As such, the enchantments Seth placed on the pendant were plus 130 willpower, plus 130 intelligence, and plus 50 endurance. The simple, but durable necklace he used had the enchantment of automatic size adjustment to accommodate Finn's transformation ability. The enchantments for the rings were a little more adventurous. Although Seth had strayed away from Olympian enchantments because of Finn's divine patron, and from demonic ones because of the nature of the item, there were still Heliopolian. The blacksmith had learned the minor sigil of Mahis and the minor sigil of Slaughter as a quest reward for making Mike's holy armaments. Although these did not belong to Bess, the set he made for Ortega had already proven that Heliopolian gods had a better affinity among each other than with other pantheons. So, apart from the enchantment of size adjustment, he placed the minor sigil of Slaughter on both rings, meaning the Finn would get a 50% boost in physical damage, which could rise to up to 400% with the number of kills. This way, the fairy brute would be prepared, even if she was swarmed by hordes of small fries. Although the minor sigil of slaughter was comparable to an advanced enchantment in its demands, engraving it was quite simple, as the power came from somewhere else and not through the channeling of magic power through specific pathways. After engraving the higher enchantment of automatic size adjustment and the hieroglyph-like sigil, he was done with the enchantment of the accessories. Looking at the clock, he saw that it was evening soon. He had been working for longer than he expected. Now that he relaxed a little, Seth could finally hear his stomach's cries for attention. He gave the 3 pieces a last polish and decided to end it for the day and take care of the soul tomorrow. Chapter 1348. How many? Karina, the tower told me you wanted to see me, the blacksmith asked the dryad. Originally, he wanted to go and finish the accessories first thing in the morning, but the tower ego suddenly informed him that Karina was asking for him. Seth knew that the tree spirit wouldn't ask for him without a reason, so he decided to come to the room of the main root of the guardian tree. Originally, it was the room where the tree was hidden. Now, it was only filled with roots. Yes, I wanted to tell you that I'm done with the preparation for the move on the cloud continent. The dryad quickly came to the point and presented him with a glowing burl. Seth stared at it with fascination. So, this is? Seth asked in wonder, staring at the glowing wood. The seed of the guardian tree, or rather the root of a clone, Karina revealed the success of her hard work. She had created the seeds for a true seedling of the guardian tree. Karina would not need to spend weeks to grow roots across the continent anymore. Once planted, this will grow into a full tree, a clone disconnected from the mother tree, Karina explained proudly. Unlike the tree stations, these would be able to grow independently. They were glowing because they were packed with energy that would allow the tree to shoot into the sky, the same way the guardian tree did during its reveal. How many did you make? The blacksmith asked, calculating. The sense of wonder was quickly blown away by the thought of the reason they were forced to create it in the first place. I used up the reserves and managed to make 4. It should suffice, Karina explained. The process of creating one of these seeds was not easy. Since these could instantly grow a tree the size of a tree station sapling, they needed the energy to do so. Karina had taken this energy from the reserves of the network of tree stations and the guardian tree itself to make them. So we will have 1 left after phase 1, the blacksmith mumbled. Although Seth was preoccupied with crafting, it didn't mean he was not part of the meetings that happened after the big briefing. Minas Mar had made many plans to implement the retaliations they agreed upon during the great meeting. If we started right now, yes. Depending on the date of our departure, I could get the energy for maybe 1 more, the dryad mused. Their operation against the cloud continent depended on the state of their preparations. Seth had insisted that they would only leave once he was done with the dragon equipment for the field teams. His reason was the information Marco had sent back from the cloud continent. The wielder of the Harbinger of Winter Woes had put a lot of work into collecting information on the political overview and the structure of their enemies. After all, the Sect Alliance, led by the Silk River Sect, was only a small faction close to the connection between the worlds. From Yu and Xiongpeng, their direct allies on the continent, they knew that not just the Ziguang province was comparable to current Earth, after its magical expansion following the apocalypse, but that the voracious cloud continent was several times Earth's size. One would expect as much from a world that went around either absorbing other worlds, or sucking them dry for energy. The Ziguang province alone, despite being treated as a barren land, was teeming with creatures and people at the level of legends or just below it. At least if they went by the standards of the system worlds, where having just a handful of legends or people close to it was a lot. Legends could continue to age and die once they were forgotten, leading to a natural cycle over the centuries. But cultivators could increase their lifespan as they grew stronger, meaning that the upper brass slowly accumulated, while immortals apparently had no set expiration date. This made the continent a treacherous place, and nobody knew what unforeseen dangers could surprise them when they went to crush the members of the Sect Alliance and try to bring back the people of Earth that had been sold away by the scene. Minas Mar could use the Oath Guard and golems to face the lower ranks, but the problem was facing such powerhouses in case they appeared at some point during the operation. This could only be accomplished by people who walked some distance on the path of legend, and maybe the named golems. Many of the old guard, the first Oath Guards in Minas Mar, had reached the early 90s, the grind was simply too much unless one had legendary items or the backing of a god. They would still take a while to reach Level 100, and then it would still be hard for them to make a name on Earth. The only ones currently on Earth that could face them and were not tasked with the protection of Minas Mar were the field teams. But the field team members, who had all stepped on the path of legend, could do little on Earth to raise their level of existence. This meant the only way to strengthen them was through equipment and skill proficiency. This was why Seth insisted on upgrading their gear as much as possible before they crossed the border to the continent. In the meantime, the field team members were either on missions or grinding their skill proficiency. "How long do you need to collect enough energy for one?" Seth asked, mulling over the dates. Seth was about to finish Finn's accessories and would then return to the dragon armor, but it could still take 2 or 3 weeks before he managed to finish everything, and they had to wait for the members currently on missions to return. The beast activities across Minas Mar have subsided considerably lately, so the influx of energy has slowed. It might take over a month to make one more, Karina estimated. Even when one saw it, it was hard to grasp the actual size of the guardian tree. Even the saplings that covered the smaller tree stations were huge beyond measure. The amount of energy one of these trees needed to grow was immense, especially if it was at high speed. But this was when talking about a fully grown one. What if they didn't have to instantly grow to full size? The Tower Master asked. "I get what you mean," Karina mumbled in thought. "Size the weapon to your target." There was no reason to use a nuke on a village. Unless there was someone on the level of a legend or close to it, there was little they could do, even against a tree only a quarter the size of a sapling. "If I lower the requirements, I can probably make up to 10 in the same time," the Dryad finally gave a rough estimate. "Then I would like to ask you to proceed in this manner. Simply keep making smaller ones until we are ready to advance our plans," the Tower Master instructed her. "Anything else I should know?" he asked the Dryad before he left. "Nope, nothing. Except, it will be Pip's birthday soon," Karina suddenly reminded him. At her words, the blacksmith halted and turned his head stiffly. There was a reason for his reaction, that way, because it meant more work in the near future. Pip was the oldest of Karina's original disciples, the group of children and teens the Dryad had adopted before the original died. Seth had met them, or rather their remnants, during his escape from the stronghold of the Theocracy of Chains. The girl had already gone through a lot at that time, and it didn't get better during the journey. She had been a great help on their journey back to Delta by leading them to New Hope, where they were able to stock up on rations. At that time, he had also given her a promise. Pip had wanted to help her home, where her parents used to live, but she was not strong enough. The blacksmith had promised her that when her time came, he would help her take care of New Hope. Although she had since then settled in Minas Mar, taking care of the other disciples and the children of Tijat. Especially, with the revival of Karina under Seth, she had been able to regain some brightness. However, her plans had not changed. She was always working hard to one day return to New Hope. Pip was going to become 15, the earliest age at which a player would be offered a class by the system. This meant that Pip would soon not just get a class, but go to level up, raise an A&D. Want to return to New Hope? Of course, she would need support and equipment. Chapter 1349 signed and finished. Making some mental notes concerning Pip's business, Seth separated from Karina and got back on the way to his workshop. On the way, he came by the tailor workshops and suddenly had the thought to check up on Natal. If Mina's set got ready soon, Seth thought it would be a good idea to give Mina and Finn their new gear simultaneously. A nice date ending in both of them getting something nice seemed like the way to go. He could even tease Finn a little by making a big thing about giving Mina her gear. Thinking mischievous thoughts, the blacksmith turned toward the tailor workshops. It was early in the morning, but Seth knew that Natal was a morning person. He was also tough as jerky, so it wouldn't surprise the Tower Master to find Natal didn't wake up early but simply worked through the night. As expected, the door didn't stay closed for long once he knocked on it. However, the face he looked into was the articulated porcelain visage of Run, his enchantment golem. As mentioned, the workshop helper was temporarily loaned to Natal to take care of the enchantments for Mina's armor. "Run? Where is Natal?" Seth asked, a little surprised. At this point, all that was supposed to be left to be done for the Shadow Panther set was the enchantment and potentially adding a soul later on. It should have been Natal with little to do but watch Run work. Instead, it is Run with the free time to answer the door. The golem lifted his smooth finger to his lips. "The old man has finally fallen asleep, Master. Please speak a little quieter," the genius enchanter implored him. "He has been nagging at my enchantments all night long and only fell asleep a couple of hours ago," Run explained. "I see, I just wanted to get a little update on how long you two will take to finish the set," the blacksmith whispered compliant. The golem froze for a moment, with the ceramic lips shaking slightly, as if he were mumbling something. It will probably take another 2 days, the golem informed him when he returned to the present. Had he just calculated that? Compared to Seth's enchantments, arcane enchantments could take quite a long time. But this was to be expected, as they needed a complicated setup that had little potential to be quickened. In exchange, they had a much higher potential than enchantments using engraving or inlays, the most common kind of enchantment a blacksmith could do. There was a reason why arcane enchanting was a whole other craft. Thanks for the update. Then I will get back to the workshop and take care of my own project, the blacksmith said, satisfied, and turned to leave. Do you not want to see the progress? Run asked, cocking his head to the side. No, I trust the two of you. I wouldn't want to ruin the surprise for myself by looking at the unfinished product now, the blacksmith said with a chuckle and waved at the golem as he left to return to his own workshop. He had procrastinated enough. The pendant and the 2 rings were already finished, all they needed was the spark of life. The soul that would give them the final touch. Although Seth was excited, he was also a little nervous. It wasn't because he thought he could fail at this point. There was no reason anything would go bad, but he couldn't help being nervous about doing the last step. Maybe it wasn't about the items at hand, but what they would represent once they were finished, once they were given. And this was not only about proposing to Finn, but he also wanted to redo his vow with Mina. The way they had become betrothed was a little awkward and more spontaneous than planned. It was a fun story, but Finn deserved a proper proposal, and so did Mina. Once these accessories were done, he would face maybe his greatest task since the world was destroyed. Planning the perfect date to ask 2 women to marry him. It would cement their relationship once and for all. No awkward, funny stumbling into it or joining as a third wheel. The blacksmith took a deep sigh and placed the items on the workbench. Engraving their look into his mind once again, he brought out the soul of Pithra, the chief of the dragon newts on earth. Leaving the house for a single soul could be called going to great lengths for Seth, but it had been worth it. The spirit blacksmith had not refined or modified the soul, and he didn't intend to. Although it was a great way to create quality materials from low-quality ones or get rid of blemishes on the soul, it also had the potential to do more harm than good. Having used his skill directly on her, Pithra had contained almost her complete ego, memory, skills, and traits. Trying to improve it could be the same as throwing a wrench in the gears. Before he did that, he was going to give the ego the same chance any other had gotten from him. After all, an ego was a powerful trait for an item. It could allow the item to activate skills and buffs on its own, which could be a tremendous help to the owner. As Seth intended to split the soul into all 3 pieces, Pithra would become the ego of the whole set. Can you hear me? A voice suddenly asked, sending a shudder through her soul. She knew this voice. She had heard it for a brief moment right before her death. It was the voice of the beast that killed her. Just think of the answer if you hear me, he repeated. Although the voice didn't seem cold or angry, no, it even sounded friendly, the sound alone made her shake as she remembered her last moment. Watching her subordinates just sink to the ground, lifeless, and then vanish in thin air. Her last moment, filled with pain and agony, feeling as if she was skinned inside out. It was no logical reaction but an instinctual fear toward the incomprehensible predator that reaped her life and soul. But the fear that froze her initially also made her answer. What would this being do to her if she didn't answer now? She had been trapped in this darkness for who knew how long? The loneliness, silence, and cold were bad enough, but adding torture to it. I can hear you, she finally answered meekly. Despite her iron will trait, she couldn't muster the strength to put up a front. She was weak, insecure, and desperate, lacking the strength to hide her sorry state. Good. I have a deal for you. One that will end your current suffering and even give you a chance back on life. Although it will be nothing like your previous. The honeyed voice answered. This sounded too good to be true. She knew that, but what choice did she have? She lacked strength, and options. The degree of how pathetic she was could be measured by the fact that, despite feeling immense fear of the voice, she had actually been happy for someone to break the all-encompassing silence of her existence. What deal is it? She asked hesitant. Currently, you are just a soul, the remnants of the dragon newt once called Pithra. I will give you a body. It will end the silence and the cold. You will even be able to interact with the world and others again. Despite her mind telling her to stay cautious, she couldn't help her hope rise. If she had a heart, it would have beat faster. Except, she urged him to continue. Except that you will become the ego of a legendary item and have to serve someone of my choosing. Do you agree? The voice suddenly revealed the hook of the offer. An item? Was she going to become an item? A thing to be used by others? Chief Pithra of the Dragon Newts would have never agreed to this kind of demeaning existence. But the soul of Pithra, which remembered her last moments in agony and had experienced the cold that came afterward, the silence, and the solitude. Fuck it, make me a thing. Deal. With a spark of bright light, and soul contract was signed and finished. Chapter 1350 Tenacity of Bishas. With the agreement of the soul's ego, Seth began his work. Before anything else, Seth took out his soul engraver to enchant Pithra's soul. The enchantment he had already chosen earlier was the legendary enchantment of durability, strength, and endurance he had once managed to learn by studying a broken shield from Spacia. By enchanting the soul with it, all three set items would share the rise in durability, at the cost of the stats being split between them. It was not really a problem, as the stats were just a small additional gain in addition to the durability. Of course, he had also thought of simply using 3 souls, so he could imbue all 3 with even better durability. He may have done so if Pithra's soul had not been an even better fit than he expected. The chance to get synergies between the soul and the prayer bead was too tempting to pass up for some flimsy raise in stats. Although the legendary enchantment of durability didn't sound like much compared to more high-profile effects, it was nonetheless a legendary enchantment. It took Seth quite some time and effort to engrave the soul with the complicated circuit, but it wasn't the biggest challenge in the project. Soon, he was done with the enchantment and could continue with the next step. The method to stretch apart a soul, so he could use one for several items, was not new to the blacksmith anymore. Having become more skilled in it, he was able to do so without putting any greater strain on the life essence he had just enchanted. With 3 equal parts, only connected by a small tether, he started shaping the first, using Karen's obol and wearing his Wraith Guard, the gauntlet that improved his handling of souls. The process of enlarging and forging the soul like metal was well practiced, and the first part soon took on the shape of a ring, embedded with a tear-shaped pearl. In a similar manner, the second part took on the shape of a smooth ring band, embedded with a stone along the ring. Owing to the complexity of the pendant Seth and Sivri had designed, the third part became a little more finicky. Seth had to replicate the structure of the pearl on an axle, held by 2 rings. Even when he was able to enlarge the soul to work on it, it took the blacksmith a while to even come up with a way to do it. After all, he could not separate or grind away parts. He felt a little like the glass blowers in documentaries he had seen when he was younger. The manner in which they stretched and pulled the heated or partially molten glass into complicated shapes. It was similar to his conundrum and ultimately gave him the inspiration he needed. Similar to them, he could stretch and pull the soul and reconnect it to itself, he just couldn't cut it. Seth ended up shaping the irregular bead with the axle sticking out from its poles first, leaving a big lump on one end of the soul. When the pearl was done, he shaped this lump into 4 limbs, which he welded back to the other side of the axle, creating the rings that held the sphere. The most difficult part was the distribution of mass. When he got that, he just had to shape the rings to properly mirror their corporeal twin. Taking a deep breath and wiping the sweat off his forehead, Seth let himself fall back into a chair to take a small break. Forging the third part of the soul into a replica of the pendant was most probably the hardest time he had forging a soul, but he was not rewarded for his effort. It had been some time since he reached Level 9 of Spirit Forging, but his proficiency was still over a quarter away from the next level up. Seth was really curious what the maximum LVL would enable him to do, but it was not time yet. After a short break and a little snack, Seth felt energized and ready to continue. There was only one step left in the making of these accessories. He had to infuse the souls into the actual items and baptize them in the waters of Styx to allow Pithra to be reborn as an item set. Cracking his neck and muscles, the blacksmith got to it. Unlike the forging of the pendant, the infusion of the 3 parts into the 2 rings and the pendant could hardly compare to the hardest time he had when infusing a soul into an item. There were actually 2 occasions he could think of, one being infusing a soul into cloth, the other being the creation of the durable Olympian bronze for Helion's armor skin. The latter was probably the worst, but he had little memory left of the ordeal. That's just how tired he was afterward. Back in the present, Seth had no problem infusing the 3 soul parts into the 3 parts of the item set. Once that was done, they found their way into the bubble of water, that were the upgraded waters of Styx. And then, finally, he heard the magic words. Ding! Various synergies have changed the effects of your works. Ding! You have created a legendary item plus 100p power of existence x3. Ding! You have created a legendary item plus 1000p power of existence. Ding! You have created a magnum opus. Plus 10 to all attributes. Your title World's Best Blacksmith has slightly improved. The first three were somewhat expected, but the blacksmith had not expected the set would end up becoming a magnum opus. Seth didn't feel like he had invested much innovation or a great deal of skill into the set. It had to be the combination of materials. After being momentarily distracted by the announcement, Seth couldn't wait to appraise the finished accessories. Taking them from the bubble of sticks, he placed the shiny new jewelry on the workbench. The first item his eyes of the maestro trailed over was the ring with the pearl of Psi. Tenacity of Bisha's legendary ring. Bisha's set 1/3. Durability, 1400. 1 defense of Sei's Hako. 2 plus 185 strength. 3 plus 185 endurance. 4 minor sigil of slaughter. 5 auto size. 6 passive skill, Brawn of Pithra. 7 active skill, Punch of Sei's Hako. Bisha's set effect, 3/3. Collapsed. A dereliction of a legendary item. The ring is part of a magnum opus of Master Smith, the first Master Blacksmith and Master Enchanter of Earth. Using mysterious means and elusive skills partially beyond mortal power, he has managed to reforge a legend. He had not unfurled the set effects, as he wanted to look at all the items first, before spoiling himself, but before he could take a closer look at the various effects, his attention was caught by the last thing he read. A dereliction? His mind got stuck on the flavor text. He read over it several times, because there was something that didn't sit right with him. The system text made it out as if what he did was something that was not supposed to be possible. Seth had been worried because of the difference between a legendary item and legendary materials. One was quite literally materials that were supposed to be processed, but the other was a finished item that attained the legendary status due to the legend it accrued. A legend was usually tied to the item. Then he realized what he had missed. Means and skills beyond mortal power. It had to be something to do with his path to legend. That was why he managed to accomplish an incredible feat without really noticing. The legendary forger was able to save the legendary pattern of materials and items he worked with if he had the corresponding skill. If he ever became a legend, he would be able to use these like enchantments, or so the description said. Currently, he needed a load of power of existence to do something like that. But the point was that he was able to copy their legendary effects and copy them independently from the original. If he could do that, then changing the shape of an existing item without losing the effect had to be a passive he had not known, yet. At least this was his theory so far. If this were really true, it was a revelation. A minor one, but a revelation. It meant he was able to reforge existing legendary items without the cost of Po. The question was how useful it would be in the future, but if he was right, it had already shown its worth today.